Welcome to Girl Choose Yourself, where we're trading self-doubt for self-trust and settling for soaring. I'm Emer Zone, your host, and together we're building the confidence to create lives so deliciously bold that they scare us a little, but in the best possible way. Because life's too precious to stay cozy in our comfort zones. It's time to choose ourselves for lives that are fabulous and soulfully fulfilling. So let's go. So welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited today to have a wonderful guest with me, Soraya Chemaly. And I'm hoping, Soraya, that I pronounced that surname correctly because I didn't check that with you beforehand.
Yes, it's Chemaly, like an S, but don't worry.
Chemaly, I'm so close, so close.
Yes.
Soraya is an award-winning journalist, activist, and author. I am deeply ashamed to admit that I only discovered her at the end of last year when I saw the beautiful book that we're going to be mostly talking about today, All She Wants Is Everything, on my local bookstore's shelf, and I had to have it. Welcome, Soraya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm going to pronounce my name for you because you may not get it.
I didn't ask you that, and I wanted to.
I know. So my name is Emer.
Emer, okay.
Gaelic name.
Thank you.
I might be your first Emer, but there you go.
Yes, I think you are. Okay. Thank you so much.
So I want to just talk to you, first of all, about that moment for me of discovering your work, because I think it leads into the larger discussion on the content of your book. So I'm looking in my favorite place of worship on a Sunday, which is my local bookstore, and I see All She Wants Is Everything, or All We Want. And I was like, immediately I had almost like an all body sensation of a profound yes, yes. And that's not too much. And so I had it picked up and I was buying it and it was mine before I even read the subtitle, which is at the top of the book, How We Dismantle Male Supremacy. And then my next reaction was, oof, she named it. She said it out loud. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was to tell me a little bit about the decision for naming this book.
Yes.
That journey.
So first of all, thank you so much for picking up the book and for reading it. I think you and I both agree that the naming is important. It's, you don't win any popularity contest putting the words male supremacy on a book. And we talked about it a lot, my editor and I, but it's important to do. It's important to normalize the words and to explain what they mean and how they function. And so just before the US 2024 election, it was pretty clear to me that whoever won the election, there was going to be a very bad backlash against women seeking power. In the case of the presidential candidates, a woman of color seeking power, but that it would be, there'd be a very harsh response to women's independence and freedom either way. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing the way the administration is chipping away at women's human rights and their dignity and their civil rights, and it's sort of every day we see that happen in all of the intersectional ways. We know that it's not the same for all women, and we know that it's infused with the xenophobia and the racism, but by and large, what wasn't being named was male supremacy. There was a lot of conversation about a lot of different frightening issues, but the things happening to women are often spoken of as asides or framed as sexism. And even the frame, as I explained in the book, of gender inequality ultimately is male supremacist in most people's minds, because the standard for what counts as equality has just always been what men have or want or the way they act. And that's not what we're seeking.
That's such an important point, that distinction. And I know you've spoken about it a lot and you make it very clear in the book. And just before we got on this, we started recording this, I was sharing with you that I used to work in law and looked at that kind of standard that we were working towards and thinking that the law was going to save us. And here I was looking at legislation that talked about equal pay. The Equal Pay Act in the UK is from 1970. And we were protecting, in the work that I was doing, companies that weren't adhering to the law 40 plus years later. And it was sort of exhausting, you know. So that idea of equality as well that you speak about still has men at the center. And you use this beautiful language, which was really new to me and was one of the many aha moments of the book, where you talked about decentering men. Can you explain a little bit about what that means? First of all, the link between male supremacy and how it centers men, and how we decenter men, how that's different from what the language and the words that many of us are using about wanting gender equality.
Well, so first of all, this notion of decentering men has really had uptake in the last several years because of online activists and feminists talking about it, talking about why it is important for women to be able to have lives that are not tethered to men, dependent on men. And it's not born out of a hatred of men. It's born out of the desire to have peaceful lives led with agency and dignity and autonomy. And so that's one thing, that sort of decentering language and movement. And there are many very smart people online talking about what that looks like. But a lot of people don't even understand what the centering of men means or looks like in their daily lives. And so the standard for citizenship, for medical research, for legal norms is basically an able-bodied man, and in the West, an able-bodied white man generally, right? It wasn't until 1993 that test subjects in medical research, like it wasn't until then that women or people of color were made into test subjects, which means that for things like medical procedures, transplant options, like dosages for medicine, they're all calibrated to men's bodies, right? Same thing. We know what this looks like now. But I think longer term, even than that, was this idea of androcentrism that Charlotte Perkins Gilman coined, which is, again, everything structured around men. So philosophy, language, history, biology, you know, and it's so normalized we don't think about it. Feminism is actually a decentering movement at its core. It's like, hey, there are more of us here. We're here. Like, it's so basic. Like, can we pay attention? You know, and so I think people in your and my generational cohort are currently having this experience, particularly, I think, if you're an educated white woman in an English-speaking country, certainly, of, wait, what is menopause? Why do we know nothing about perimenopause? What is ADHD? I mean, it's so much of it because we have just enough independence, status, wealth of our own that we can say, why am I not able to find the medical care I need or understand my own body? And that's a function of the fact that men don't experience any of these things, you know? And so that's what centering and decentering look like. And what I think is interesting is that the interpretation of decentering culturally is that it's a form of hating men. Simply women seeking to be independent is perceived as hating men, which to me just illustrates the degree to which we're expected to be extensions of men, extensions of their selfhood, extensions of their bodies, you know. There's no sense that we can just be free.
Greeter is offering a very special promotion just for listeners of Girl Choose Yourself. If you're interested in trying the Greeter service, you can get $10 off your first experience by entering the code Choose Yourself when you're making that booking. Choose Yourself is all one word, and you'll find more details in the show notes.
I think exactly what you were talking about there, that last piece about that we hate men if we say these things. I had exactly this conversation with a friend who's visiting from out of town this weekend, and she was talking about having these type of conversations with a friend, and her friend agreeing up to a point and then being very, very quick to say, but I don't hate men, but I don't hate men, that I'll lose. And we were both of us sitting over dinner last night going, what the hell is that? Why this need to say, but I don't hate men?
Yes.
Like, I don't know whether it comes from this feeling, I don't want to be disliked. I need to please. I need to not kind of be too far away from you in my independence, because that might come with too much of a penalty. I would just be curious what your thoughts were on that, because we were like,
that's very common, right? First of all, there's the demonization of feminism as a man-hating movement, which is propaganda. So let's set that aside. That exists. A lot of people buy into it. But then secondly, I think, as you identified, we're socialized to please, to put others first, to care for other people. And we do care for other people. It's not that we don't. It's just that having reasonable needs as a human being gets washed away in that gendered equation, and we need to be able to reassert it. We need to be able to say, you know what, I need more sleep. I need more rest. I need a partner, not a protector in my own house. I need whatever it is I need, and that's very hard for a lot of women. I had a really interesting conversation. I was talking to a book club about the book, and I think most of the women were not particularly immersed in feminism, but they had a sense that things are going wrong.
Yeah.
Like, things are going wrong. Things are not good.
No shit.
But what was so interesting to me is I said, do you have any specific questions, after we sort of had a discussion? And this one woman who looked pretty uncomfortable certainly with the words male supremacy, she said, I read the book. Thank you so much. I don't have a son, but I think if I did have a son, I would be inclined to try and give him as many advantages as possible. And I thought, you are centering an imaginary boy. It doesn't even exist, right? Wow. She was just projecting this anxiety onto a non-existent person, which happens all the time. Like, I spoke to an editor a couple of years ago, and she basically said, maybe you should soften some of your language about men. I said, you mean like writing the word men? Should I not use the word men? Because that's really all I'm doing. I'm describing behaviors that mainly aggregate towards men. And she said, it's just that you would attract more readers. And I said, the imaginary male readers, right? Because I have no illusions. I've been doing this for decades at this point. And there are men who read my book, but generally speaking, for any woman nonfiction writer, as I say in the book, fewer than 20% of a woman's nonfiction books are read by men. Whereas for men, that's 50-50, right? So we're already dealing with a huge gap. And so I'm like, why are you catering to this demographic of people exactly? What is it that you're worried about,
It's so interesting. I remember talking on that subject too about women nonfiction writers, and when women were writing in personal development, they were self-help books, but men do leadership books, and I'm like,
that's
fuck
right.
off.
Yeah.
It's kind of part of the whole. It's exhausting, being a woman and trying to please not only the men but the imaginary men.
Men, and trying to assert knowledge, And I always say, we're socialized to be pleasers and not knowers, and yet we're knowers, right? And we're denied the right to have that as a mode of moving through the world without penalty.
Yes, and the penalties are real, are very real.
The penalties are very real.
I remember you were talking about, you share some of your story growing up, but we all have these moments when we look around and we notice, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are all the men happening there? And why can't I do this thing? And you shared your story. I'm a Catholic, recovering
Yes.
Catholic from
Yes.
Ireland. And you had your story as well about growing up and saying, oh, I think I'll be a priest, until you were
Absolutely.
heard that, I
Hmm.
don't think so. But this weekend, I think you'll like this story. Maybe you know it. There was a great concert in town here in Santa Fe, and it was Joan Osborne and Katie Tunstall. And Joan Osborne has exactly the same story as you do
Oh,
about
that's
wanting
funny.
to be the
Yes.
priest. And I was going, Joan.
There are so many of us. Half of feminism is angry Catholic girls.
I swear I was going, Joan, Soraya, yes. I didn't want
That's
to be the
very,
priest. I was just like, why are the women just cleaning the church?
oh, I know.
Why are the men doing all the talking? And then why are we getting all excited about having a slightly more, you know, inclusive male pope? I was like,
I know.
I said, call me when you've got a woman.
I know.
Until then,
That was I agree with you. I when this last pope was named and there was all this celebration, I wrote a Substack just titled "No Cookies for Popes."
and we have to talk. I haven't gotten on. Your Substack is called Unmanned. Is that
It
right?
is. Yes.
I'm going to. We'll be talking about all the places to follow you, but I just
Oh,
discovered that
thank
the
you.
other day, and I was going, so
Yes.
perfect. But thinking about our youth experiences, and we come up, we're immersed in the system. It's the water that we're swimming in, and that's why it's so difficult to see. And then we're
Mm-hmm.
not helped even a tiny little bit to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a DIY project of
It
self-education
is. That's right.
to see it.
Every
And
generation, over and over again.
what's exhausting about this, and I want your thoughts on this, because there's so many. What I love about the book, one of the many things I love about the book, is how beautifully it is structured. In that after each chapter, there's this really helpful statistics and the data, and that here's what we're looking at, here's the real
Mm-hmm.
numbers. And I heard on another podcast that you were saying you wanted that to be 6 pages
I
long, but you
did.
had to cut. I need the other pages, but it is that kind of seeing the data, and that one of the numbers that were in that one of those sections were about the time a child is 6, that
Mm.
they've been socialized into seeing men as deferring to men for the expertise, for the leadership,
For
for their
genius,
voice,
the
for
capacity
genius,
of genius.
and that so you already at 6 we've got so much that needs to be unlearned,
Hmm.
and
Which is
then
amazingly, it's really depressing if you think about it, right?
and we haven't as a parent.
Hmm.
I definitely didn't
Hmm.
as a parent, and I'm a parent of 3 children, 2 boys, and the
Yeah.
youngest a girl, now a senior. And you're thinking about, oh, by the time I've unlearned and such a
Yeah.
disconnected from this system that has been feeding me all of this, I she's already 7, you
I
know.
know. I know. But you know what? Yeah. What's interesting about that age is it's the age at which kids are now firmly in schools,
Mm,
right? And so there's a lot of talk about the boy crisis in education, which is important, but I think
mm,
distorting and also misplaced in its agenda. But we, we don't consider the fact, and I've actually put this in each of my books because I think it's very important, that children go into school with the same amount of confidence,
yeah,
but they do not leave it with the same amount of confidence.
no,
And even though young men are suffering academically, which is for me a function of many complicated things, but primarily male flight from education as
yeah,
as a space where, it's stigmatized by girls and women's success. But girls, as academically proficient as they are not happy, confident people when they're leaving schools. And there's something inherent about the structure of schools that is not serving any of our children, but it is particularly damaging to women's confidence and ambition and sense of their own rights.
it's oh yeah, oof, it's deeply, deeply disturbing, because I've been watching that
Mm-hmm.
in my own daughter, in her
Yeah.
lived experience, and then thinking, what the hell
Mm-hmm.
happened? And some of it I see what happened, and
Yes.
it's been incredibly disappointing to see what's tolerated from men and also what my daughter was asked to tolerate from a male teacher who would come into school supposedly teaching history and spend his time talking about his personal problems, going off on tangents, this, that, and the other, and expressing unhelpful political views, a little bit anti-women. And I, of course, intervened and said, I'd like a word. And then having that teacher sort of punish her for getting me involved. And then a woman at the top of that school not protecting my daughter and telling her, you're going to meet people like that in the outside world and you need to learn how to deal with them. And I lost my mind. But I was sitting there with a distressed young girl and said to her, not all women are allies. This is who you need to not be like.
Yes.
That is a woman who is pleasing men and who is not making men accountable when they are hurting girls.
Others.
Actually.
Yes, that's right. She doesn't have solidarity.
Yeah. And I said, and this is a very hard lesson that I wish you didn't have to learn. And then I, as a parent, was making the decision, am I going to go in and rip this woman, give her an education, or am I going to protect my daughter and wait until after graduation? I chose
It's hard. Yeah. Well, this is the issue, right? Because as you say, the penalties are pretty high. Like in my case, we have 3 daughters, and when they went into high school, the younger 2, I said to my husband, I'm all done here. I will not be going into the school. You need to be their advocate and you need to be their champion. And I've done as much as I can, and it probably does more harm than good if I go in there. So that was the deal we cut, and that was what happened. But, even that, it's the admission that being the woman going in and holding other people accountable will end up in penalties, as opposed to being the man who goes in, who will stand a much higher likelihood of being respected and listened to instead of denigrated. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, again, this kind of looking at the environment and responding to what is the playing field out there and how it isn't fair. And me going in and complaining about it not being fair is going to come with a penalty, and then deciding how am I a smart operator in this so that I can be the ally to her. And I sort of did the same as you did in this instance. And I said, you call up that woman now and you call up that male teacher and you get our child moved to a different one, because I'm going to be the reactionary sort of.
But this is remarkable, right? Because first of all, it requires us to recede into that patriarchal construct as individuals, right? Because there isn't enough collective action happening.
Yeah.
There's not like enough feminist consciousness in these institutions to say there are all of these types of patriarchal subsidies happening that are invisible to people, and yet they affect us all profoundly. And in order to do what we need to do for our individual children, we'll make those adaptations. But those adaptations are unhelpful in the long run, and also not available to everybody.
Exactly.
They're just not. And it comes down to race and class and ethnicity and citizens. I mean, there's so many factors to it,
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of recognizing the huge privilege that I enjoy and the big obstacle, and then going, and my obstacle is a lot smaller. My obstacle is a lot smaller. And how do I change this? So it's kind of like operating within this unfair system on so many different levels.
Yes.
Is taking a toll on all of us. And in the book, you go through very systematically, all of the environments where we're going to be seeing it, from when that first education system, which we all had that. Well, I went to an all-girl Catholic school, which
has its pluses and minuses.
And then, college and into the workforce, and then realizing, I'm getting paid less, or, oh, I'm being sort of complimented in, I think that sexual harassment sort of like, oh, I'm getting more attention
What
because
is the nature of that? Yes.
yeah, or trying to work out the unwritten rules of an environment that was clearly operating differently for me. And then just kind of that exhaustion, and then thinking, oh, I'm making plenty of money. This is great. I've worked out how to kind of operate in this environment. And then I have children and it all falls apart.
Well, the institutions, I feel like we're in a Godfather movie. They just suck you back in. You don't want to be doing it, and yet you're forced to because of economics, rational decisions, social pressures, social norms. It's really something to see.
Because it's operating everywhere. And then you are looking,
Yes.
I think one of the things that really helped, well, the use of language is so incredibly important about how you name things.
Yes.
And you talked about, we all see through male tinted glasses. And I think you've shown people in the book what that looks
What
like,
that means.
what that means in so many ways. And it's kind of like, I can take, when I take off those male tinted glasses, what will I see? What can become possible for me then? And I think
Right.
that's the real uncharted territory for so many women, because they're looking for more. They're feeling this kind of, things aren't right. I see so much that isn't fair. And particularly with the backlash now, it's just exhausting.
It is
From
exhausting.
Me Too to, we're seeing it right now with the Epstein files. It's like, who were we
That
supposed?
is a wild ride.
It's the male as the provider and the protector identity role, and then you challenge them on the protector role with Me Too, and they did fuck all, apart from going, it wasn't me, not all men.
Right.
Very little, if anything, changes. And then you have the Epstein files. You had, well, before that, so many other things.
There's so many things in the last 10 years, it's very hard.
It's
hard to keep
exhausting,
track.
but also I remember with Christine Blasey Ford and, Kavanaugh, and just crying when Kavanaugh got confirmed onto the
Yes.
Supreme Court and going, Jesus Christ, what does it take to believe women?
Yeah, I mean, if we cared, we would have stopped Trump dead in his tracks when he said he grabbed women by the pussy. That was
Yeah.
all. That's all we had to do.
Yeah.
That could have said, I won't vote for him, because it was men who mainly voted for him in that way, like in each cohort, many more men. If we just had a small group of men that said that was a line I won't cross, he shouldn't be sexually assaulting women and boasting about it. But that didn't happen,
And you speak about, which I thought was really interesting, maybe wake up and say, oh, and really help me understand what's happening in politics at the moment, when you talked about male flight. Male flight from feminized spaces, or spaces that become feminized, and feminizing something taints it,
Right.
in.
It is a stigma for them.
Can you explain that from the, you touched on it a little when you talked about education and, male flight from the education area, but now we're talking about how it operates in politics, and when you have men fleeing to the far right, where these ideas of male supremacy are being sort of promoted in,
And
ever more
reinforced in
toxic
every
way.
Right. Yeah, so male flight's a really well understood phenomenon. It is what we just said, which is essentially men kind of collectively moving into different spaces, sometimes professional spaces, sometimes cultural spaces. So the manosphere is an arena of male flight online, densely masculinized, dedicated to hegemonic masculine norms, hostile to women. It's kind of a fortressing of a space. So if you think of the social sciences, as women were allowed to go to universities and colleges, entered the social sciences, became clearly capable and even authoritative. Men fled into economics, which people forget is a social science, right? And they fortressed economics, very hostile space. Same thing with philosophy, for example. Or if you think about STEM fields, men, ceding the liberal arts, humanities ground to create a sort of fortress masculine space. All of that is the migration of status tied to masculinity away from one space and into another space that women are excluded from. And that's all complicated by race again. So we know that, Black women pay double, sometimes triple penalties for those habits of exclusion because they happen on the basis of gender and sexual identity and race altogether. But male flight is male flight. It's not speculation. We see it happening all the time. And so what I explain in the book is that all over the world, men are much more likely to support anti-democratic, macho fascist movements, authoritarian movements. And in the United States, if you thought about our last election, what the Democrats did was publicly, openly create an image that women were active participants and shapers of. They had a Democratic conference in which every speaker tried to reposition the idea of the leader of the country, not as a father figure, but as a mother figure, as part of a matrilineal line. I personally think that was a mistake because it's also sex segregated. But their convention alone was just like my mother, my grandmother, it sort of did the patriarchal thing in reverse. It wasn't truly feminist. It just flipped the model, right? And so the more the Democrats were associated with feminine needs, women's issues, care, the more men fled the field, right? They've fled rightward. So that's what it looked like. It just looks like male flight from democracy.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. Thank you for explaining that so well. I think it takes a lot that we're absorbing when you begin to start seeing what you haven't been seeing because you have been wearing, these kind of male tinted glasses.
And often white tinted glasses, right?
Very much white tinted glasses as well. And I was thinking particularly because of my daughter now with the college application thing.
Yes.
And I was really interested. It was one of these things that when I was reading your book and I'd come to the end of a chapter and I'd say, listen to this data. And I was, everybody listen. And it was about admissions in colleges.
I've literally spent 2 weeks immersed in admissions tables.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. Because for me, I'm nurturing a young girl who is trying to survive a system that does not nourish her adequately.
That's right.
And it has taking this beautiful human being that was like so bright, and then she becomes, I don't
Shrunken.
trust, and shrunken. And I'm right at this moment trying to say, we're going to get to the finish line. You're going to take a big inhale and exhale, and then we are going to move into a different environment where there's going to be more agency, and there's going to be more choice, and there's going to be more support and more space. And I was sharing with her on the admissions criteria because she's trying to get into this school and that school, and this notion that there's some element of fairness in all of this, which is the biggest fucking joke. But you shared some really interesting research on how once you put the standard as merit-based, that the male numbers go down in admissions. And so there's this artificial lifting of the men are getting this, lift up to get into the... Tell me a little bit about that. Yeah. Tell me about best affirmative action.
One of the ironies of the boy crisis narratives is that it doesn't, there's no acknowledgement of the fact that schools, elite schools in particular, Ivy Leagues, small liberal arts colleges, not so much the STEM schools, that's a different situation, but liberal arts colleges and Ivies have been gender balancing, most of them. And they've been gender balancing for at least 20 years, which means that they're, as they say, putting a thumb on the scale. And in some cases, that means that men are 50 to 70%, they have a 50 to 70% greater likelihood of getting in. which means that the schools are essentially taking the concentrated cream of the crop of women academic achievers, and they're putting them in school with men who are not their intellectual or academic peers. And that's not good for anyone. It causes a lot of status anxiety and a lot of resentment. But even before that happens is the fact that we are not acknowledging that that has been happening at all. We're talking about a boy crisis, which is a generalized education crisis. It is a crisis of our entire education system for many reasons, right? But we're talking about it is that it's like a specifically feminized space that's hurting men. It's very zero sum. It's very punitive for girls and women. You know, like the idea of redshirting boys. Who's going to do that? Who's going to stay home with boys an extra year, right? Wealthy families are already doing that.
Yeah.
But if you impose that on all families, it's going to be women who cannot afford not to work, who then have to figure out what to do in an environment where childcare costs are exorbitant, housing costs are exorbitant. So again, we're sort of taxing the people who can least afford it with that policy, right? But yeah, we have affirmative action for men in these institutions, and that's just one patriarchal subsidy, because you also have an order of magnitude difference in per student spending for athletes, for example, in a lot of these schools, or a lot of investment in STEM fields instead of the humanities or the arts. And all of those things create an environment that is really dissonant for students, because men are on one track that's very status optimized, but women are on another that's merit based. And those two things together, you know, they don't work.
Yeah. It was just one of the many moments when I was like having an, oh my God, I didn't see that. I didn't know that. And I think that your book is just full of all of those moments on a journey for seeing clearly. And as somebody who has always been open to this, I know that you did women's studies at Georgetown at the
I
beginning.
did. Yes.
I wanted to do women's studies when I was going to college, and a very sort of paternalistic father who was an HR director of a major company said to me, dissuaded me and said, that will be problematic on a resume.
On a resume.
You'll be seen as a troublemaker, was
Yeah,
basically what he was saying.
disadvantaged.
You'll be
Yes.
disadvantaged because you're interested in this. And so off I went and did international marketing and languages. But we are kind of experiencing this, that advocating for yourself, seeing clearly what is a problem, and then you will be the problem for seeing the problem and
That's right.
speaking about the problem. And when we then communicate with men, you were saying about how women get treated when they communicate with men. You said it's easy to convince yourself that a problem doesn't exist if you refuse to listen or learn from the people experiencing it. And that was another moment for me. Even speaking to brothers when I was working and growing up, and they'd say, oh, I have a female boss. I
There
have to go
can't be
to,
gender inequality.
and I said, oh, and Jesus Christ, you have an education and you're responding to me like that? Or I've never seen it, therefore it doesn't exist.
Well, that's the situation with street harassment. I just wrote a long article about how the dynamics of street harassment scale up into the kind of violence we're seeing with ICE. Because with street harassment, people are socialized to look away, right? And what's happening now is that people aren't looking away anymore, and that's hard for the system, you know. But you can see how men are less likely to intervene than women over, like, we know that from studies. And you know, men are clearly intervening. They're fighting. They're, you know, in the case of Preddy dying, that's not what I mean. It's just that as a general thing, because men are more conservative than women and less progressive, women are on the front lines much more, you know. And that's because they experience these things, all of the things, in an embodied sense, much more. But because of those kind of media consumption imbalances, fiction, nonfiction, news consumption, podcasts, you know, men will look to male experts overwhelmingly and not listen to women experts, not consume information that is produced by women. And that leaves them, frankly, ignorant, right? You cannot navigate the world and think that you are knowledgeable when you ignore women.
It seems so obvious, yet
Yeah.
so hard to get people to
Yeah.
actually like connect with and kind of agree with and see and move towards that. I want to there's so much in this book, and I could talk to you for several hours, but I want to kind of move on to the hopeful, the how to
Mm-hmm.
part, because that was also what pulled me in, was the how to, because there's so much that we can get bombarded with, particularly when we are in this ecosystem of social media, when it
Mm-hmm.
can feel incredibly draining. And there is the important act of self-care, which is
Mm-hmm.
self-preservation, and is just so important. But then there is the how we move forward. Once we
Right.
take off, once we see what's been in the way, or it's been coloring how we're seeing the world, how we're experiencing it, when you move then towards the hopeful part and the how to, give us some tips and some direction on a pathway as regards, these refusal movements.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, I
learned
mean, I
about
think,
so much in your book just reading that.
yeah, I think what's interesting, again, even with the words male supremacy and the subtitle, I'm not saying the subtitle is How We Dismantle Male Supremacy. And I didn't want it to sound like this is your guide to
Yeah.
dismantling male supremacy. So this was a compromise, because what I'm saying in the book is we're doing it. The backlash doesn't exist because we're failing. The backlash exists because we have been so successful, right? And so, I think that's important to note, that
That's
the
huge.
revolution, that's huge, right? We need to stop. We need to stop, and we need to acknowledge the revolution in slow motion that has happened over the last 60 years in our lives. And as I like to say, even the most conservative person who is in front of a camera for this administration is leading a deeply feminist life, just by virtue of being educated, owning a car, having a bank account, living in a place that they can afford or can even sign a lease for. Like, just go down the list. Having said that, I think the third important thing is to understand that we can't just all be constantly marching on the streets. That's not how change happens. It's essential, but change happens in the day to day, in the granular parts of life, where we are making small decisions that accrue over time to socialize children differently, to change the school cultures that we might be part of, or the workplace cultures. And that's very powerful. You don't see it. It's not brash and heroic. There are no barricades, there are no guns, but that isn't how this works. This is just the slow, steady work. And so it is that kind of, that idea that we have to be the change we want to see. And that's happening. And in fact, Gen Z women give me so much inspiration and hope, because
Yeah,
they are trying to lead the lives that they want to have exist.
I
They're
know.
making decisions. They are choosing different relationships. They're choosing very carefully their identities and what they're thinking about, what their values are. They're just operating at a different level, because in fact they can see exactly what they have to lose. They are not wearing those glasses.
Yeah. I think that is a beautiful recognition as well, thinking about, Gen Z and looking at them. And I see that in my daughter alone, of kind of going, I don't think I'll ever get married. And I'm like,
Mhm.
good for you, whatever you like.
Whatever you like, you do what's going to make you happy.
And she said, I don't think I'll have children. And I say, you don't have to have children, whatever
Hmm.
you like.
Yeah.
Like you get to craft this life for yourself. You get to curate it. You get to choose what is going to put you at the center of it, and say,
Hmm.
how will I choose to live in this world, and what do I want to contribute, and who do I want to relate to, and how do I want to relate to them? And that's amidst all of this, that absolutely gives me hope going
Hmm.
forward.
Yes, I mean, hopefully they can continue to make those choices. I saw the news this weekend, and again, it was this Project 2026 Heritage Foundation marriage camps.
Oh,
They
Jesus.
want to send people to marriage camps, single people. And I'm like, okay, it sounds really silly, but people said it wouldn't happen with abortion, and here we are. And that always was gobsmacking to me, just that dismissal of people saying this is their intention and this is what they're going to do, and we can't dismiss this the same way. I think a lot of Americans think it just can't happen here, and clearly it's already happening here.
It's happening, and it's not even slow motion. It's happening at
Right.
such a pace,
High speed. That's
that
right.
it's extraordinary to be watching it. And one of the things that you opened the book with, when you were talking about that question that was asked of women, would you prefer to be in the woods with a man or a bear? And then overwhelmingly the bear was what was being chosen. Then men got themselves in a like, oh, not all men. And then
Yes.
they were asked about, what about your daughter? And they all chose the bear. But there was
Yes.
another one, I don't know whether you saw it, and it was a young bloke going around, and he was talking to people on the street, and it was mostly sort of younger women up to sort of midlife, and he was saying to the women, would you choose to live in an environment that was all women? And they were like, hell yeah, absolutely. Sounds fabulous. Where do I sign up?
Where do I sign up?
And then they were going around to the men and asking them, would they live in an environment that was all men? And they were going, absolutely not. No, why would I want that?
Why would I want that? I mean, the thing is, men know. They just don't like it when we say it out loud.
Yeah.
That's really the difference, right? Like those bystander intervention studies of street harassment, for example, like the bear example, men know the risk. They don't intervene because they're thinking about the danger,
Yeah.
right? But when you say street harassment isn't trivial, when you say its underlying power is in the threat of violence that is always there, they'll dismiss it and they'll say, oh, that's nothing. He's flirting. He wasn't really following you, whatever it might be. But the minute that intervention is required, then the
Then
risk
it's
is
serious.
legible. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to read this part because I think this had me like, I don't know whether you can see this, but I just love heart.
That's
and
every
this.
writer's dream.
It was just like, decentering men is women saying no more to doubting ourselves, suppressing our successes, sacrificing our health, silencing our voices, diminishing our accomplishments, apologizing for ambition, laughing when we're disrespected, accepting exploitative and unequal partnerships, educating men in the most bloody basic decency towards us, putting others' pleasure and comfort before our own, ignoring our own boundaries, justifying our actions, seeking permission for our choices, begging for autonomy. That was the bit that said, yes, wanting everything
Yes.
is absolutely a birthright, to want everything, to have everything, for those things to be true. And if that upsets somebody else, and you say this somewhere else, you then have to think about that somebody else. What is your whole identity based on?
Yes, that's right.
If me wanting this, me having this is a threat to you, then who are you?
Yes,
Who
how
are
is
you?
it constructed? If it's constructed around my vulnerability, that's not good.
You're a rock star. I wish I could just talk to you once a week. Everybody needs to go out and buy this
Thank you.
book. It's like a handbook. I want to see the other pages of the data that you had to leave out. I think it's no small thing to produce such a life-changing book that's this size. And I know that was,
Thank
a
you.
big
Well,
part of the
it's
challenge too.
It's my editor. My editor is a superstar. I literally submitted the 6 pages every single time, and every single
know.
time she said no.
She made the right decision.
She did. I have to tell her that.
She made the right decision because there was absolutely
It's
enough.
just too much. Yes.
And when you're immersed in it, you want to tell everybody everything, and it's hard to make
It's
it.
a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot, and this is enough, more than enough, for it
Thank
to
you.
be worlds changing. I also have, because once you get that, guys, you'll want this, and you'll want this.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, thank you so much. Both of those are, a third of them are the citations. They're actually short books. They just have a lot of data.
I love it. I love the
Yes.
citations because when I pick up a book, I'm looking for the citations because then I know I'm going to read the author because the author did the work and they didn't just say, oh, here's a thing I think about.
Right. And also being, former good Catholic girls, we just do the work.
We always do the work, over prepare.
Over prepare.
And over deliver, which you do every time. I'm just going to ask you a closing question.
Yes.
The title of the podcast is Girl, Choose Yourself.
Yes.
And I like to invite guests to think about what does that mean for you, this idea of choosing yourself?
I mean, to be honest, it seems pretty basic, but it means speaking out loud. That's been very hard for me my whole life, to say the hard things. I find all kinds of ways to not say the hard things, or to soften the things, or to punish myself for saying the things. And so it's been a lifelong fight with myself to do that, to say it's okay to actually act in your own defense, to act with rigor and power and strength in the pursuit of justice, if this is what you believe, and that's hard to do.
Beautiful. Share with people where they can find you, to follow you, to have
Yes.
more of
Thank
this
you.
wonderful Soraya energy.
So I do write a Substack called Unmanned, which is about all of these issues. It's about living through backlash, finding joyful refusal, and male supremacy and all of its complications. And I'm also on Instagram, my own account, Soraya Chemaly, but also Rage Becomes Her, which is based, it's sort of more news intensive. That's really where my news goes. And I'm not on X anymore, although I have an account. I left X a long time ago. So those are the main places. Oh, and Blue Sky. I'm sometimes on Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. I lose track, honestly. There are just too many. There's too
Substack
many.
mostly, though, and
Substack
Instagram.
is great. Yes, I love Substack because people are having substantive conversations. It's nice, and there's not. It hasn't been destroyed by toxicity.
I'm seeing that. I'm late to it, and I'm kind of going,
I was late
okay,
to it too. Yeah.
I need to go there. Thank you so much for the
Thank
privilege
you
of your
so much.
company. It's been
You
a
know,
joy. It's been
it
a
has
joy
been
for
a
me.
joy. It has. And so thank you, Emir.
Thanks so much for tuning into the episode this week. I hope you got a lot out of it. And if you did, please share it with somebody who you feel would benefit. And leave a review. Always greatly appreciated. Lots of free and paid resources to take things a step further. You can find those in the show notes. And hey, if nobody has told you this yet today, you are amazing. And the world is a far more beautiful place because you're here with us all. Stay cool. Bye.